At a family dinner, my parents casually mentioned that my sister would be moving in with me. I just let them talk because they had no idea I had already moved to a new apartment they knew nothing about. I, 32M, sat at the dinner table, fork halfway to my mouth, as my parents dropped what they clearly thought was routine news. The roast beef grew cold on my plate while I listened to them explain how my sister would be moving into my spare bedroom next month after her latest relationship imploded. Again, Mom spoke about it like she was discussing the weather forecast. She mentioned how convenient it would be since I had that extra room anyway, and how my sister really needed family support right now. Dad nodded along, adding something about how blood is thicker than water and how I'd always been such a responsible big brother. The irony was delicious. They had no clue that 3 weeks ago, I'd quietly moved into a sleek one-bedroom apartment across town. The keys to my old place were sitting in an envelope in my jacket pocket, ready to be handed over to my landlord tomorrow morning. This wasn't the first time they'd volunteered my space for my sister's convenience. Over the past 5 years, she'd crashed at my place during 3 different breakups, each time staying longer than promised and leaving my life in shambles. The last time, she brought her unemployed boyfriend who ate my food, hogged my TV, and left beer bottles scattered around my living room for 2 months. But this time felt different. This time, they hadn't even asked. I chewed slowly, watching their faces as they planned out my life without me. Mom was already talking about how she'd help my sister pack this weekend, and Dad was offering to rent a moving truck. They'd clearly been discussing this arrangement for days, maybe weeks, before bothering to inform me. The smart play would have been to tell them right then. But something dark and satisfying held me back. I wanted to see how far they'd take this assumption. I wanted to watch them invest time and energy into a plan that would crumble the moment they discovered the truth. So I just nodded. I made appropriate concerned brother noises about my sister's situation. I even asked when she'd be moving in, as if I was genuinely planning around it. The lie felt smooth on my tongue. Over the next week, I watched the family group chat light up with moving logistics. Mom shared Pinterest boards for small space organization. Dad researched the best moving truck rates. My sister posted crying laughing emojis about finally getting to live with her favorite brother again. Meanwhile, I was settling into my new place, arranging furniture and hanging pictures in blessed solitude. Every evening after work, I'd come home to my perfectly quiet apartment, pour myself a drink, and check the family chat for updates on the move that would never happen. The elaborate planning continued. Mom bought my sister new bedding for the spare room that no longer existed. Dad cleared his Saturday schedule to help with the heavy lifting. My sister started boxing up her belongings and posting dramatic social media updates about new beginnings and family bonds. I should have felt guilty watching them waste their time and energy. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction building in my chest. For years, I'd been the reliable one, the one who cleaned up messes, the one whose life could be rearranged to suit everyone else's convenience. Now they were about to learn what it felt like when that reliability suddenly vanished. The moving day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. I was at my new apartment, sipping coffee and reading the news, when my phone started buzzing. First came a confused text from Dad asking where I was. Then a more urgent call from Mom wondering why my car wasn't in my usual parking spot. I let them sit outside my old apartment building for 20 minutes before answering Mom's third call. Her voice was tight with confusion and growing panic. She asked where I was, why I wasn't home, whether something had happened. I told her I was fine, just running errands. She asked when I'd be back because they were here with the moving truck and my sister's belongings. The silence that followed my next words was worth every uncomfortable family dinner I'd endured over the years. I explained that I'd moved out 3 weeks ago, that I no longer lived at that address, that there was no spare bedroom anymore because I'd downsized to a one-bedroom apartment they knew nothing about. The explosion was immediate. Mom's voice rose to a pitch I'd rarely heard as she demanded to know why I hadn't told them. Dad grabbed the phone and started lecturing me about responsibility and family obligations. In the background, I could hear my sister crying about her belongings sitting in a truck with nowhere to go. I remained calm, my voice steady as I explained that they'd never actually asked me about this arrangement. They'd simply informed me of their decision. I pointed out that at no time had anyone sought my consent to become my sister's temporary landlord again. Dad sputtered something about family not needing formal permission. Mom accused me of being selfish and vindictive. My sister took the phone and screamed that I was ruining her life, that she had nowhere else to go, that I was the worst brother in the world. I listened to each accusation with growing satisfaction. Finally, I was experiencing the other side of the family dynamic where someone else's poor planning became a crisis that had to be solved immediately. When they exhausted their initial outrage, I offered practical suggestions. I mentioned that my sister could stay with mom and dad temporarily. I suggested checking local apartment listings for places she could afford. I even recommended a few extended stay hotels that offered weekly rates. None of these suggestions were well received. Mom insisted their house was too small for an additional adult. Dad complained about the expense of hotels and temporary housing. My sister declared that all available apartments were too expensive or too far from her job. But these were their problems now, not mine. The family dinner the following Sunday was tense. I arrived at mom and dad's house to find my sister camped out in their guest room, surrounded by boxes and wearing the same clothes she'd had on 3 days earlier. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well on their narrow daybed. During dinner, Mom made pointed comments about family loyalty. Dad mentioned disappointment in unexpected places. My sister barely spoke, shooting daggers at me between bites of mashed potatoes. I ate peacefully, complimenting Mom's cooking and asking Dad about his golf game. When they tried to draw me into discussions about my sister's housing situation, I expressed sympathetic concern but offered no solutions. I'd learned their playbook too well over the years. First came the guilt trips, then the manipulation, then the accusations of selfishness when guilt failed to produce the desired compliance. But I was done being their designated problem solver. The real breakthrough came 2 weeks later when my sister finally found her own apartment. It was smaller than she wanted and cost more than she preferred, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she'd been forced to handle her own crisis without a family member swooping in to absorb the consequences. Mom called me that evening, her voice different than I'd heard in months. She admitted they'd gotten comfortable assuming I'd always be available to help. She acknowledged they should have asked rather than assumed. She even apologized for taking my reliability for granted. Dad's apology came later, delivered during a private conversation over beers at a sports bar. He confessed that they'd fallen into a pattern of treating me like the family safety net instead of respecting my autonomy. He said he was proud that I'd stood my ground, even though it had created temporary chaos. My sister's apology took the longest to arrive. She showed up at my new apartment one evening with takeout food and a genuine expression of remorse. She admitted she'd gotten too comfortable using my generosity as a substitute for planning ahead. She thanked me for forcing her to handle her own problems for once. The conversation we had that night was the most honest we'd shared in years. She talked about feeling infantilized by the family's constant rescue attempts. I explained how exhausting it had become to be everyone's first resort when things went wrong. We both acknowledged that the old dynamic hadn't been healthy for anyone involved. Update 1. 3 months later, the family dynamics had shifted completely. My sister was thriving in her new apartment, having learned to budget properly and handle her own emergencies. She'd even started dating someone who had his life together instead of her usual pattern of choosing projects to fix. Mom and Dad had stopped making unilateral decisions about my time and space. They now asked before volunteering me for family obligations. They consulted me before making plans that involved my participation. Most importantly, they'd started treating me like an autonomous adult rather than a perpetual caretaker. The revenge hadn't just been about teaching them a lesson. It had been about breaking a cycle that was slowly poisoning our relationships. By refusing to be the automatic solution to everyone's problems, I'd forced them all to develop healthier coping mechanisms. My new apartment became a sanctuary in ways my old place never had. When family visited, it was because they wanted to spend time with me, not because they needed something from me. The difference was subtle but transformative. Update 2. 6 months after the moving day disaster, my sister invited the whole family to a housewarming party at her apartment. She'd furnished it herself, decorated it to her own taste, and filled it with friends she'd made in her new neighborhood. Watching her give tours of her space, I saw a confidence in her that had been missing for years. She talked about her job promotion, her savings account, her plans for the future. She'd become someone who solved problems instead of creating them. Mom pulled me aside during the party and admitted something that surprised me. She said that watching my sister struggle initially had been hard, but seeing her succeed independently had been incredibly rewarding. She realized they'd been robbing my sister of opportunities to grow by constantly cushioning her failures. Dad echoed similar sentiments later, acknowledging that their enabling behavior had hurt both my sister and me in different ways. He appreciated that I'd found a way to break the pattern without destroying the family relationships permanently. The experience had taught us all valuable lessons about boundaries, respect, and genuine care versus enabling behavior. My act of quiet rebellion had reset our family dynamics in ways that open confrontation might never have achieved. Update 3. A year later, I hosted my first family dinner at my new apartment. The one-bedroom space was cozy but sufficient for the four of us. We cooked together, laughed about the moving day chaos, and enjoyed each other's company without any underlying tensions about who owed what to whom. My sister had bought a house by then, a small starter home she'd saved for entirely on her own. She was dating the same guy from months earlier, someone who contributed equally to their relationship instead of draining her resources. During dinner, she brought up the moving day incident herself, laughing about how dramatic she'd been. She thanked me again for not enabling her pattern of poor planning and crisis creation. She said the forced independence had been the best thing that had happened to her in years. Mom and Dad had learned to lean on each other more instead of defaulting to me for every family crisis. They discovered they were more capable problem solvers than they'd given themselves credit for. Their marriage had even strengthened as they worked together to support my sister without overwhelming any single family member. The revenge had evolved into something more meaningful than I'd originally intended. Instead of just teaching them a lesson about taking me for granted, I'd accidentally created space for everyone to become better versions of themselves. My new apartment remained a symbol of the boundaries I'd established and the respect I'd earned. Every evening when I unlocked my door and stepped into my quiet, private space, I remembered what it felt like to reclaim control over my own life. The family still turned to me sometimes when they needed help, but now they asked rather than assumed. They respected my right to say no. They understood that love and support didn't require sacrificing personal autonomy. Looking back, letting them plan that doomed moving day was the smartest decision I'd made in years. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people experience the natural consequences of their assumptions. Sometimes forcing others to confront their entitlement creates opportunities for genuine growth and healthier relationships. And sometimes, the most effective way to change family dynamics is to quietly change your own circumstances and let everyone else adjust to the new reality. The truth has a way of revealing itself eventually, and when it does, the impact is often more powerful than any argument or confrontation could have been. My sister never asked to move in with me again. My parents never made unilateral decisions about my life again. And I never had to worry about my space being invaded by family members who confused love with unlimited access to my time and resources. The apartment I'd moved to in secret became the foundation for the respect and autonomy I'd been craving for years. Sometimes the best battles are won not through confrontation, but through strategic silence and perfectly timed revelations. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.